Hello everyone and welcome. In this video we're going to be discussing what happens when an engine has no oil. As a demonstration, we'll be viewing an engine with and without oil running. This is the exact same engine on the left and the right, on the left with oil and on the right without. Both engines will start at the exact same time, but the video on the right was filmed 24 hours after the video on the left, allowing for the engine to completely cool. This is a 212cc air-cooled single-cylinder Harbor Freight engine. I'll be keeping the oil equally classy using not just any oil, but high-performance premium motor oil from the grocery store. My whole point for this is to show what even the cheapest engine oil can do versus nothing at all. It's API certified, but I wouldn't personally use this in my cars. There are 5 points we're monitoring on each engine. Point 1 is the crankcase, below the level at which oil will rest. Point 2 is on top of the crankcase, where there obviously won't be any oil resting near. Point 3 is the air-cooled cylinder bore. Point 4 is the exhaust pipe exiting the cylinder before entering the muffler, and point 5 is the valve cover. This is a pushrod style valve train with overhead valves. So at this point you're wondering, wait a minute, why is the engine with oil so much hotter than the engine without? Well, it's because I'm an idiot and left the choke closed on the engine without oil for over 2 minutes. Even still, after about 7 minutes, the engine without oil will catch up in exhaust temperature. One thing I did want to make sure of is that there was no reason other than the oil that the engine on the right would have higher temperatures than the engine on the left. As a result, its throttle is just slightly lower, the choke was closed for far longer, and it is in about 1 degree cooler ambient air. Any temperature that's higher on the right engine is purely a result of extra heat from not having lubrication. Now, as you can see, the surface of the engine is highly reflective of thermal imaging. As a result, calibrating for the material is challenging. However, if you see the frame freeze, this is the camera calibrating, and immediately after a frozen image, the temperature values will be the most accurate. Ambient air temperature is about 15 to 16 degrees Celsius, though the engine was stored in my garage before filming, which kept its temperature slightly cooler. Let's go ahead and fast forward to 8 minutes, where now the engines are operating at similar conditions. To be honest, I was surprised how trouble-free it seemed the engine was up until this point. It sounds fine, and temperatures are no higher than the engine with oil. As proof that the engine has no oil in it, look at points 1 and 2. You can see a large temperature differential as the warm oil resting at the bottom is hotter than the crankcase. On the right, points 1 and 2 are the same, as there's only air on the other side of the crankcase for each point. I'll admit, watching the temperatures side by side, I was a bit disappointed how much cooler the engine without oil managed to be. It goes against my intuition, but then again, if I knew what would happen from the start, there'd be no point in doing this, so it's cool to see. My best explanation is that the oil acts as a heat sink for the engine, helping the engine with oil remain at higher temperatures than without. Without the oil, the amount of energy stored internally is less than the amount of energy emitted through the air, so it's cooler. That said, combustion temperatures are obviously a bit higher, as the exhaust temperatures remains high on the right. After 15 minutes, the only temperature that's actually hotter for the no oil engine is the exhaust, and just slightly. So what's my recommendation here? If you want your engine to run cool, you should remove all the oil? No, absolutely not. Unpleased with what I've seen so far, I decided to open up the crankcase and have a look inside. Here's where it became obvious permanent damage had occurred. First of all, look at the small amount of oil that didn't quite make it out while draining. It's quite dark, and this is after a 15-minute run with oil and 15 minutes without in a brand new engine. I kept the oil which I drained out after the first test, and you can see it here on the left. On the right, the oil which remained in the drained engine. Clearly quite dirty, and actually it has quite a bit of metal content in it, as you can see reflecting as I move around the towel. Significant wear of the engine occurred, whereas the oil on the left is perfectly clean and clear. Examining further, I removed the connecting rod cap from the crankshaft. This is the bearing the crank rotates on. On the left we can see a brand new cap, and on the right after 30 or so minutes of running, with half of that time in an engine without oil. You can see the smooth, shiny surface on the left versus the scored, less reflective surface on the right. Indeed, you can see the scratches on the crankshaft as well. I would also expect to see similar issues with the camshaft and cylinder bore. Admittedly, this was a bit more of a scientific approach and didn't have the explosive ending many of us were hoping for. But don't fret, as the folks at Car Throttle have driven a Mercedes C180 without oil on a track until its inevitable death. I won't give it all away, but just know that the engine doesn't leave the track with all its original parts. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Thanks for watching.